Today we're going to be tackling the present tense in German. This being a masterclass, what I mean by that is we're going to cover everything you will ever need to know about the present tense in German. So this is going to go through a bunch of different information lists. So we have conjugation, we've got different types of verbs and all kinds of other stuff. This is not going to be focused on word order all that much, but this is a masterclass in how to use the present tense in German. If you are one of my Patreon supporters, I will be uploading additional materials to go with this, so you guys can have some worksheets. You'll get a copy of this presentation I'm about to use, and I'll also upload a MP3 file format of this live stream that we are doing. So you can have all of these things for my Patreon people. And since you guys are already being awesome, the Patreon supporters that I have right now, they are getting these masterclass materials for free. They are not being charged for this video, so that's just an extra perk of being one of my Patreon supporters. And I'd like to give a shout out to them for being awesome. And I really appreciate the support that those guys give me. And so if you want to join them, there is a link in the description where you can find my Patreon page and you can join them, and you can get these materials as well. I will be uploading it to my website where you can also purchase worksheets there. It's germanwithantrim.com. If you're looking for the shop, you can go /shop behind the germanwithantrim.com. And there you can find all of the worksheets that I've made for other random stuff. You get a bunch of free ones that are on there. But you can also find things from the previous live streams and this live stream. They're all available on there. Without further ado, let's get into what are we actually going to be covering in this video, and what exactly do I mean by master class. So today's topics, we're going to be covering obviously regular conjugation in the present tense in German. So these are normal verbs, they follow all of the rules and they do what they're supposed to do. Then we're going to add when to use an E for pronunciation purposes. So there are certain verbs in German that require you to use an extra E for pronunciation. We're going to talk about when that happens and how that happens, why that happens, and so on. Then we have the conjugation of haben and sein, two of the most important verbs in the German language, but these two verbs are also some of the weirder verbs, and so we have those two verbs on the list that we have to talk about. We're also going to be talking about weird but common verbs. So haben and sein are pretty obvious ones that are weird, but they're very common. And there's a couple of other ones that people don't realize are a little bit out of the ordinary. So we're going to be talking about those verbs as well. Then there are stem-changing verbs, sometimes called irregular verbs. These are verbs that they have some sort of a change in the middle of the verb. We'll get to what exactly a stem is here in a little bit. But these are verbs that stem change. There's something in the middle of them that changes a little bit. Then we have prefixes. I'm going to be very briefly talking about prefixes. We're going to be talking about separable, inseparable, and dual prefixes, which often are prepositions, not what I was thinking in my head there. But prefixes, these are separable, inseparable, and dual. We're going to cover all three of those topics. I'm not going to go too in-depth on this because I think that, as some people mentioned in the comments of one of my community posts the other day, prefixes do deserve their own video, and so we will be talking about that in a different masterclass at some point. We're also going to be talking about modal auxiliaries, also called modal verbs. These are things like müssen and können and dürfen and so on. So we're going to be talking about those at the very end of today's presentation, okay? So without further ado, let's jump into the actual content. First of all, regular conjugation in German. You have to understand a few terms here. Conjugation is basically just getting your subject and your verb to match each other. So like if you say, I am going to the store. In English, that makes sense. That's proper grammar. That's because your verb and your subject match. Now, if you say something like, I is going to the store, people think that you're either dumb or you don't know your English all that well. So that's what conjugation does. It fits your subject and your verb together. In order to do this in German, we start with what's called an infinitive of a verb. And you'll see that there at the top. The infinitive form is the form that has the en on the end of it. That's what you're going to find in the dictionary. That's the form that you're going to find if you're ever looking up a verb. That's that form. That's what's called the infinitive. And in order for us to conjugate these verbs, we have to first take off the en at the end of these verbs, and then we get what's called the stem. So in the first example here, the GEH, Those three letters, that's what's considered to be the stem of the verb gehen. Gehen, of course, means to go, and that there is our stem for that verb. Now, once you have the stem identified in your verb, you then need to add the following endings to your verbs. We have ich, will take an e for the ending on the verb, so the form for gehen, for instance, would be ich gehe, I go, or I am going. Du is the you form, the informal or the kind of a casual singular form. If that's the case, we're going to use an st for the end of the verb. That's gehst, du gehst, du gehst, and that's you are going or you go. Then we have sie, or s, that's he, she, or it. Those are all going to take a t at the end of them. That's geht, sie, es geht, or geht, sie geht, es geht. All of those forms take a t. Wir looks a lot like the infinitive most of the time, so wir will take an en, so that means that in this case it says gehen, gehen. And so it has that en at the end of it, looks just like the infinitive, and this is true most of the time. We'll get to some exceptions later on in this presentation. The ear form is going to take a t. That's the same type of thing that happened in the s form, and so this is ihr geht, and ear means you. It's basically if you had two do's or two or more do's, then those are the forms that you're going to have for those. So du becomes ihr if it's plural, and that becomes geht, ihr geht, if in the conjugation form there. And then the bottom z's here, we have z meaning they and z meaning you. When it's capitalized, it's used as you, and when it's lowercase, it means they. Obviously, that causes some confusion between z and the other two z's, but based on the context of the conversation, you should be able to identify exactly what we mean by z in any given sentence. One of the ways that we can tell the difference between z meaning she and z meaning they or z meaning you is the conjugation of the verb. So in this case, we now have an en again at the end of the verb. Again, it looks a lot like the infinitive form. So we have here gehen, sie gehen, sie gehen. Now, if you want an in-depth thing about pronouns, I'll link a video in the description whenever we're done with this presentation that will show you what all of these pronouns mean, how to use them in more depth. That's not the topic for today. We're talking about conjugation and present tense. So we're going to assume that you know what these pronouns mean and kind of move on from that assumption. Just so that we have a second example of a verb in the present tense that follows all of the rules and never messes with you in any way in the present tense, that is a verb like machen. Machen means to do or to make, and is conjugated pretty straightforward. You just drop the en at the end of the verb, making it so that the stem of the verb is now exposed. We now have mach, and then we have to add our endings to go with that. So we have ich mache, I make or I do. Du machst, you do or you make. Macht or sie macht or es macht. So he makes or does, she makes or does, he or it makes or does. Wir machen, ihr macht, and sie machen, sie machen. So, conjugation of gehen and machen, we're going to go through these one more time just to make sure, and that goes ich gehe, du gehst, sie, es geht, wir gehen, ihr geht, sie gehen, sie gehen. And for machen we have ich mache, du machst, sie, es macht, wir machen, ihr macht, sie machen, sie machen. Don't forget, if at any point you have any questions during this presentation, go ahead and leave them in the comments in the live chat there. And at the end of the presentation, I'll go back through the live chat and read through all of your questions and make sure that I have addressed all of these questions. If you really want to draw my attention to them, go ahead and leave one of those super chats. That will obviously highlight it, and I'll get a little notification that says that you gave a super chat, and I will obviously take note of those things. So anyway, next thing on our list is conjugation with verbs that their stem ends with an S, SS, or S set. So these are basically the same thing. So an S set is kind of like a double S anyway, and then two S's would obviously be an actual double S, and then the letter S is still just an S. So all of these kind of are the same thing. That's why they're on the same slide here. And you'll notice that the only thing that is weird in any of these forms, I highlighted them in red for the endings, and that is that the do form no longer has an S. And that's because if you already have an S, there's no real point in adding an extra one at the end of there. So for any verb that ends in S, SS, or S set, you do not add an S for the do form for that verb. So conjugation of a verb like reisen, to travel. You would conjugate it as ich reise, du reist, sie, es reist, wir reisen, ihr reist, sie reisen. Hassen means to hate, and you conjugate it in a similar way. Again, there are two S's already in the verb, in the stem of the verb, so we don't bother putting an S at the end of it for the do form. So we have here, ich hasse, du hast, hat, wir hassen, ihr hasst, sie hassen. And the last one on our list is heißen, or to be called. So if you say like, my name is, this is the verb that you're going to need for that. So you would say, ich heiße, I am called, ich heiße Levi, ich heiße Herr Antrim. So conjugation for that one goes, ich heiße, du heißt, sie, es heißt, wir heißen, ihr heißt, sie heißen. And again, if it ends in an S, SS, or S set, all of those forms will not take an S for the do form. That's all that changes. Nothing else changes in these at all. Everything else is perfectly normal. You still have your E for the ich form, T for the sie and the ihr forms, and ENs for both wir and sie at the bottom of the chart for the plural forms. Also, if the verb ends with an X or a Z in German, so for instance, the verb hexen. Hexen means to hex or to curse. So if you curse somebody, like a plague upon your houses or something like that, if you want to be all Shakespearean, that is to hex, and in German that is hexen. If that's the case, again, there is no S for the do form. We again just conjugate with a T. So we have ich hexe, du hext, sie, es hext, wir hexen, ihr hext, sie hexen. Same thing happens if you have a Z at the end of the verb. For instance, in the verb sitzen, sitzen means to sit, and so we would conjugate it as ich sitze, du sitzt, sie, es sitzt, wir sitzen, ihr sitzt, sie sitzen. Now, another problematic ending for stems of verbs would be either D or T. If the verb stem ends in either D or T, we add an extra E for the do, sie, es, and the ihr form for all of its conjugated forms here. So that's du, sie, es, and ihr. They add an extra E in between the stem of the verb. In this case, for instance, the verb reden, the stem again is red, that's red. And then we add an extra E, and then our ending. So for instance, the do form, instead of being redst, which you can't actually pronounce, the words can't get out of your mouth because it's impossible to pronounce a DST at the end of a word. So instead, we say du redest. So conjugation of the verb reden as an example would be ich rede, du redest, sie, es redet, wir reden, ihr redet, sie reden, sie reden. And again, notice that the green E in there is only a problem for the do, sie, es, and ihr forms. Now this is pretty obvious because the ich form and the wir form and the sie form all already have an E. There's no problem with pronunciation here, and so we don't need that extra E. As another example, we have the verb reiten. Reiten means to ride, and so we use here that extra E for du, sie, es, and ihr. So the conjugation goes ich reite, du reitest, sie, es reitet, wir reiten, ihr reitet, sie reiten. Now, if there is a consonant combined with an M or an N, it will likely have this same E used for pronunciation. For instance, in the do form of the verb atmen, atmen means to breathe. If you try and say the word atmen for the do form without that extra E, you would try and say atmst. And it's very difficult to get those letters out of your mouth, and so for that reason we add that extra E. Again, only for du, sie, and ihr. So, ich atme, du atmest, sie, es atmet, wir atmen, ihr atmet, sie atmen. Another example would be the verb zeichnen. If you try and pronounce the do form for the verb zeichnen without this extra E here, you end up with zeichnst. And you can't do that, and so instead we add that extra E. So the conjugation for zeichnen goes ich zeichne, du zeichnest, sie, es zeichnet, wir zeichnen, ihr zeichnet, sie zeichnen. Now, all of these are because an M or an N combined with another consonant at the end of the stem of the verb, that will cause us to have that extra E in there. Be careful though, this is not always the case, and sometimes these verbs are a little bit confusing to people. If you know that the rule is that you have an M or an N with another consonant, and then I throw out verbs like lernen, lernen has an R in there, but the R kind of attaches itself to the E in that word. So it's lehr and then the nen. So it kind of eliminates that pronunciation problem. So if you try and pronounce the do form for lernen without the extra E, you end up with lernst, which is perfectly easy enough to pronounce, and so we don't have any issues there. So conjugation of a verb like lernen, you would just drop your en at the end of the verb to get your stem, and then add your endings of est, ten, and ten. So, ich lerne, du lernst, sie, es lernt, wir lernen, ihr lernt, sie lernen. Now, if either the letter N or M are combined with another N or M, that doesn't count as an additional consonant. And so I just want to draw attention to verbs like kennen and kommen. Both of them have an N and another consonant, but because that consonant is the same as the previous one, they're set as one sound, so there's no real point in having that extra letter for pronunciation purposes. So, conjugation of a verb like kennen would be ich kenne, du kennst, sie, es kennt, wir kennen, ihr kennt, sie kennen. And kommen would be ich komme, du kommst, sie, es kommt, wir kommen, ihr kommt, sie kommen. Now we get up to some verbs that are very popular, very much needed verbs in the German language, but are just plain weird. They don't follow normal irregular verb rules, which is kind of an odd way of phrasing things, but normal irregular verbs, what I mean by that are stem-changing verbs, which we'll get to here in a little bit. But these verbs don't really follow those patterns, and for that reason, we're going to talk about specifically these four verbs: haben, sein, werden, and wissen. Okay? So, haben means to have, and for whatever reason, it loses the B in du and RZS. So, instead of habst, it's just hast. And instead of habt, which is the same thing for the ear form, by the way, it's perfectly okay to say the verb habt, but that form there is for the ear form. For whatever reason, it doesn't have that B in the RZS form. So, conjugation of haben is mostly regular, but then it's got those two little tricky ones in there. Ich habe, du hast, sie, es hat, wir haben, ihr habt, sie haben, sie haben. Now, sein makes zero sense whatsoever. Sure, the do form and the er form both end with their proper ending of an st and a t, but the rest of the forms make absolutely no sense whatsoever. So if you're taking the verb sein and you put an e, st, ten, ten, you're going to end up getting none of them right. So the verb is as follows. Ich bin, du bist, sie, es ist, wir sind, ihr seid, sie sind. Now, you may hear in the word seid, the S-E-I-D, that it sounds like it still ends in a T, which would mean that it's sort of regular, but the pronunciation here is because the letter D at the end of a German word is generally going to be pronounced as a T anyway. That's what's happening here, not that the pronunciation is trying to match the conjugation. That's kind of backwards thinking about things. But conjugation of sein is really weird and makes no sense. It means to be. Obviously, to have and to be are very important verbs in any language, and so haben and sein need to be on your list of vocabulary, but be careful with conjugation because they are incredibly weird. The next one up on our list doesn't look like it should be in a presentation about the present tense, but werden can be used in the present tense. It's used to express the passive voice, so things like the ball was hit. If that's your sentence, the ball being hit by something else is going to be used with werden. So the ball is being hit, if we're going to stay in the present tense today, then you would say, der Ball wird geschlagen. So at any rate, that's how you would use werden in the present tense, and for that reason, you need to know what the conjugation looks like. So I translated as will on here because it usually is used to make the future tense, but it is probably more common actually to be used with the passive voice. If you're just learning conjugation in German and you're watching this presentation because you're just starting out with your German learning, I'm guessing you probably don't know anything about the passive voice, which means that we are going to have to do a different masterclass on that on a different date. At any rate, conjugation is weird in two forms. Again, the do and er form, they're very problematic in a lot of verbs, and in this case, we lose the e in exchange for an I, and then for whatever reason, the er form just becomes wird. So it's just weird in general, so the conjugation looks like this. Ich werde, du wirst, er, sie, es wird, wir werden, ihr werdet, sie werden. Now, one little thing that I want to point out, and that is the ear form still has that extra E in there because the stem of the verb werden ends with the letter D, and so we have to add that extra E in there for pronunciation purposes, like I said earlier in this presentation. So werdet as opposed to just werdet. You can't put both of those sounds together. So, next up on our list is the verb wissen. Wissen means to know. It's used with factual information, so like I know where the red fern grows, I know what you did last summer. All of those are going to be used with wissen, okay? And this one's weird because it changes from an I to an EI, which doesn't happen to any other verb in the German language. This is not a standard change of any kind. It also exchanges two S's for an S set. What many people don't know is that the reason for the S set change here is not because it's a weird verb, it's because of the EI. The combination of EI when it's pronounced together is called a diphthong. And a diphthong is basically just two vowels that are pronounced together to make one sound. And so when that happens, you can't have two S's behind it in the German language. The spelling rules say that you need to have an S set, and for that reason, we have here an S set instead of two S's. But that's also the reason it goes back to having two S's later on. Now, for whatever reason, it does not have an ending at all for the ich form or the er form, but it does take a T for the do form. And this, again, does not have an ST because that rule that I told you before, if there's an S set or two S's or even just a single S, you don't add an extra S for the do form. So that's what's happening here. We don't have an S because of the S set. So conjugation of wissen goes ich weiß, du weißt, sie, es weiß, wir wissen, ihr wisst, sie wissen. Now we finally get into stem-changing verbs, or verbs that are sometimes referred to as irregular verbs. I don't like that term because irregular verbs to me are the 4 verbs that we just talked about. They follow almost no rules, and for that reason, those are what I would consider irregular verbs. And these are stem-changing verbs because they follow all of the rules, except where their stem changes. And I've highlighted that in yellow for you so that it draws attention to exactly what we're talking about. But this is kind of a confusing topic, and that is in the do and RCS form, a verb might change from whatever vowel was in the stem of the verb to begin with, and then change to some other vowel. So in these instances, on this first page here, we're going to be talking about verbs that change from an A to an A umlaut, and those verbs in this case, we start off with the verb fahren. Fahren, if you drop the en at the end of it, it would just be fa. And so the stem of the verb, the vowel in the middle there, that's the part that's going to change. And so we have here this A that's going to change to an A umlaut. Again, only in the do and RCS forms. So conjugation for this particular verb goes ich fahre, du fährst, sie es fährt, wir fahren, ihr fahrt, sie fahren. And if you giggled just now when you got to the ear form, you're not alone. Basically, every student that I have ever had giggles when we get to the ear form of the verb fahren, because like, he just said fart in class. Yeah, well, I just said it again. So, ihr fahrt. Now, again, only the do and RCS form have these changes. So we have another verb here as an example of kind of a normal one, and that is laufen. Laufen means to run, and it has an AU, and the reason I chose this as an example is because it has AU and not just an A. If you have AU, the umlaut will always go over the A. And when you change things from AU, instead of saying laufen, we now have läuf. Läuf as our stem. So conjugation of laufen goes ich laufe, du läufst, sie es läuft, wir laufen, ihr lauft, sie laufen. Now there are 2 things that you need to be aware of, and that is, remember just like 3 slides ago when I told you that if a verb stem ends with the letter D or T, you have to add an extra E for pronunciation purposes, because it wouldn't be possible to say those letters together with the do form or the RCS form, or even the ear form for that matter? Well, that doesn't happen if you have an A to A umlaut stem change. So for instance, the verb laden, which means to load, or if you have a prefix, later on we can talk about like to upload, for instance, would be hochladen. Hochladen is the verb to upload. And then you could have runterladen to download, and so on. Anyway, the point is the verb is laden, and it means to load. And in the do and RCS forms, it still takes that A to A umlauts change. And because of this change, we do not have an extra E in between the stem of the verb, the laid part, and the ST or the T for the do and RCS forms. So we have here ich lade, du lädst, sie es lädt, wir laden, ihr ladet, sie laden. And if you're saying to yourself, why is it that you can have this not have that extra E there for the RCS form in this verb, even though in the verb redet, if you tried to say the exact same thing, you would end up with the RCS form being redt. It would sound exactly like sie es lädt. It's the aid. Don't ask me why, it makes no sense, but there is this stem change here, and that forces this E out of the extra spot that it had there. Do pay attention though, in the ear form for both of these verbs that I'm showing you here, laden and halten, they still have that E for the ear form. Halten is the second example that I have here so that I can show you a form that has a T at the end of it and a stem. And this one is also even more weird because of the do form. Instead of having hältst, it's just hältst. There's no extra T there, so that one's even more confusing. And to make matters even worse, we now have lost an extra T in the RCS form here, and that becomes hält. Instead of having 2 T's, it's just 1 T. So yeah, this is incredibly confusing for this verb, but if you have a stem changing verb, a verb that goes from an A to an A umlaut, and that verb's stem ends with a T, you will have this kind of construction. This is going to be incredibly rare, but at least the verb halten does this. And halten is used in a bunch of different combinations for separable prefixes. So whenever we get to that here in the later parts of this presentation, the verb halten is going to be very helpful later on. So it is important that you know this conjugation here. Conjugation for this one goes, ich halte, du hältst, sie, es hält, wir halten, ihr haltet, sie halten. Second category of verbs that have a stem change in them are verbs that go from an E to an I. There are quite a few of these verbs, and the first one I want to show you here is geben, which means to give. Geben, again, is going to have that I for the do and RCS forms only. The rest of the forms are going to be perfectly normal. So it goes, ich gebe, du gibst, sie, es gibt, wir geben, ihr gebt, sie geben. Seems pretty straightforward. For whatever reason, the verb nehmen is weird and decided to take the same stem change, but for whatever reason in that stem change, instead of having an HM in that word, we now have here just an IM instead of an extra H, which is kind of confusing. And also I'd like to point out that this is another example of a verb that has an M and a consonant before it, but there is no extra E for the do, RCS, and ear forms. So again, no extra E here for that because ne, that EH sound, is going to be kind of combined into one thing, and for that reason, we don't need that extra E for pronunciation. So, conjugation of nehmen goes, ich nehme, du nimmst, sie, es nimmt, wir nehmen, ihr nehmt, sie nehmen. There's another category of stem changing verbs, and that is it goes from an E to an IE. So these are verbs like sehen and lesen, for instance. So sehen in the do and RCS forms will take an IE, making it siehst and sieht for the do and RCS forms. And lesen will take that same IE stem change and go from lesen to liest and liest. Okay, so first one here is sehen, which means to see. And that is, ich sehe, du siehst, sie, es sieht, wir sehen, ihr seht, sie sehen. Conjugation of lesen goes, ich lese, du liest, sie, es liest, wir lesen, ihr lest, sie lesen. Again, nothing terribly fancy about these, we just have an E to an IE stem change, and stem changes happen in the do and RCS forms. Also, I do want to point out on here the do form of this verb does not have an extra S in there for the least. It's just one S there instead of having an extra S for the do form, and that is again because of that rule that I mentioned before. If a verb stem ends with an S or an S set or two S's or an X or a Z, any of those things, they do not have that S for the do form, so we just have liest instead of having an extra one. Now we're going to get into a topic that actually involves a little bit of word order. Up until this point, we're just talking about conjugation because I assume that you know where your verb goes in a sentence, and that's not really the main topic of today's presentation. So now we're going to get into something that actually requires a little bit of you paying attention to word order, and that is separable prefix verbs. And as the name implies, we have here prefixes that can be separated, so they are separable. So yeah, seems to make sense. Here's a list of the separable prefixes that you could have, and then some kind of generalizations of what the meanings of those endings could possibly be. So the first one on here is ab. If you see ab at the beginning of a verb, first of all, it is separable, and second of all, it ironically tells you that you're going to take something from something else or take it away from something. So the prefix ab is not only separable itself, but also means to separate most of the time. An An is also separable, so if you see that at the beginning of a verb, it can be removed. And then this would be used as at or to, so it goes like towards something. That's the kind of generalization that goes with that prefix. Auf would be on, out, or up, depending on its use. So let's say like, well, I'll give you some examples here in the next slide, so we'll wait on the example verbs of stuff like that. But auf means up or out or on. Aus means out of or from, and you may recognize this as a preposition, and that's because a lot of these separable prefixes are in fact prepositions as well. So it's kind of confusing sometimes. You'll see what looks like a preposition at the end of a sentence, and that's not what's going on here at all. The thing at the end of the sentence is in fact a prefix from the verb. So if you ever see by at the end of a sentence or aus at the end of a sentence, they're not prepositions there, they are separable prefixes. Aus means out of or from. By means along or along with, or going with some other thing. Ein means a lot of different things, but either in, into, inward, or down. So mostly just in and combinations of in, and then down as kind of an extra one on the side there, but mostly it just means in. Fort means away or forth or onward. I use it as like continuing for most of the times that I've seen it in verbs. It just means to continue on whatever verb that may be. Mit would be along or with, and again is also a preposition, so if you see it at the end of a sentence, it's not a preposition, it is a prefix. Nach means after. It's also a word to copy, depending on its usage. Vor means before or forward, so it can be kind of in the direction of the front. Weg is away or off, and this is kind of a confusing one to some people because there is also the word Weg, W-E-G, but it's capitalized and is a masculine noun, der Weg. Der Weg is the way or the path. And for whatever reason, there is also this word, Weg, which is a prefix, and it is not pronounced the same, even though it is spelled exactly the same. So Weg is this one, and it is pronounced kind of like with a K sound at the end, as opposed to Weg, which is also with that K sound, but with a long E sound instead of the short E that you have in Weg. Zu means shut or closed or towards or upon, depending on how it's used there, but that's zu. Zurück is back or in the direction opposite of the word that we had earlier for vor. So vor and zurück, they are forward and backwards when they're used without being a prefix. And so these obviously are going to have that same kind of meaning whenever they're used with a verb. And zusammen also means together whenever it's alone. And so zusammen obviously means that whenever it's attached to a verb as well. Now we get into some examples of how to use these verbs in sentences. The first one, of course, being ab. I'm going in alphabetical order, the same order that I had before. And I highlighted the conjugation in these examples so that you can see where those conjugation things that we had before show up. So the first one on here is abnehmen. Abnehmen means to lose. So nehmen is to take. Abnehmen is to take off in this case. So if you're taking the translation from the example I gave earlier of ab meaning away or from, in this case we're taking away from something, we're losing, and generally this means to lose weight is how it's being used. So for instance, the sentence, Ich nehme dieses Jahr 10 Kilo ab. Ich nehme dieses Jahr 10 Kilo ab. Ich nehme dieses Jahr 10 Kilo ab. Ab is at the end of that sentence. And the reason that we're bringing this up in this present tense presentation is because prefixes look like your infinitive should be abnehmen, and so you would conjugate it with ich abnehme, du abnimmst. It's not like that, and so that's kind of confusing, and so that's why we're bringing this up in this presentation. An is the next one on our list. So the verb rufen means to call, but if you're calling someone up, meaning that you're calling them on the phone, you need the verb anrufen. So this prefix can change completely different. So meaning like, are you calling somebody as in like yelling in their direction, or anrufen, which means to call them more than likely on the telephone. Warum rufst du deine Mutter nicht an? Warum rufst du deine Mutter nicht an? Warum rufst du deine Mutter nicht an? Why don't you call up your mother? Again, that an is at the end of the sentence and not conjugated with the verb itself. Next one on our list is the prefix auf, and I use nehmen again, mostly so that I can show you the conjugation of nehmen used in context with the RCS form. Nehmen is to take, same as it was in abnehmen, but this time we have auf, and as I mentioned before, auf means on, up, or out. So in this case, we're taking something on. We're on the record of sorts. So we have here to record. So the sentence example that I have here is Herr Antrim nimmt jede Woche neue Videos auf. Herr Antrim nimmt jede Woche neue Videos auf. Herr Antrim nimmt jede Woche Videos auf. So again, this is in the present tense. We have that stem changing verb in there, being all weird with the NIMMT form. And then at the end of the sentence, our prefix auf. Next up, we have aus. For instance, the verb sehen means to see. Aussehen is to see out, as in like, how do you see from the point of view of other people? So in this case, we're looking at the verb to look, aussehen. How does something look? So we have the sentence, Du siehst wie David Hasselhoff aus. You look like David Hasselhoff. Du siehst wie David Hasselhoff aus. Beibringen, we have by, which is with or along, so we're going to bring something along. We're going to bring something with you, and that is to teach, beibringen. So, Herr Antrim bringt euch jede Woche Deutsch bei. Herr Antrim bringt euch jede Woche Deutsch bei. Mr. Antrim teaches you German every, well, it says every year, there's a typo there for you, but every week is what it actually says in the German sentence there. I don't know how I missed that one. But jede Woche is every week. Herr Antrim bringt euch jede Woche Deutsch bei. Bei again at the end of the sentence there because that's our prefix. Next up we have ein. Ein is to. Laden is to load, so this is going to be to load to, I guess, if you wanted to use that translation of ein. But this is actually to invite. So we have here einladen. Deine Mutter lädt mich zum Abendessen ein. Your mother is inviting me to dinner. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Yeah, your mama jokes. Deine Mutter lädt mich zum Abendessen ein. Your mother is inviting me to dinner. Next up we have fort. As I mentioned before, it means to continue most of the time. So in this case we have the verb bewegen, which ironically is also with a non-separable prefix with the b, but we have here bewegen, which is to move. Fortbewegen is to move along or to continue on. So the example here is Die Wolken bewegen sich fort. The clouds are moving along or continuing on, meaning that the clouds are no longer going to be staying here, they're just going to be kind of floating along like clouds do. Die Wolken bewegen sich fort. And I apologize, that one's not highlighted like the other ones are, but fort should be purple and the en at the end of bewegen should be highlighted in red. Mitmachen. Mitmachen means to participate, machen means to do, and mit means with. So this is to do with, meaning to participate. Charlie Brown macht immer mit. Charlie Brown always participates. Er macht immer mit. He always does with. Nachmachen, as I mentioned before, could mean after or towards, but in this case we're actually using it as to copy. So to make a copy of something is to imitate. So we have here this example, der Schüler macht den Lehrer nach. So the student imitates the teacher. Macht den Lehrer nach. Nach is at the end of the sentence there as our separable prefix. Vorhaben. For is our separable prefix here, and this is a little bit subtle in the way that I used it here because of the extra clause I had to use, but to have planned here is actually being separated, so we have that for at the end of our first clause, and so normally it goes at the end of the sentence, but because of the way that I had to phrase this sentence, it's actually there at the beginning of, at the end of the first clause there, before the second clause starts. But the vor part here is before, so this is what someone has before them. They have this planned. So, ich habe vor, nach Deutschland zu reisen. I plan to travel to Germany. Ich habe vor, nach Deutschland zu reisen. Weggehen. Weg is away, so weggehen is to go away. So, warum gehst du nicht weg? Warum gehst du nicht weg? Why don't you go away? Warum gehst du nicht weg? Next up we have zu. Zu is the opposite of ab, so in this case we mean to gain. So zunehmen is to gain weight in the same way that abnehmen was in the previous one. Er nimmt jedes Jahr 10 Kilo zu. Er nimmt jedes Jahr 10 Kilo zu. He gains 10 kilograms every year, as opposed to the other person who was planning on losing 10 pounds that year. And the last two examples in this category, we have zurück. Zurück is back, and so we have zurückschlagen is to strike back, as in the title of the film, The Empire Strikes Back. In German, this is Das Imperium schlägt zurück. Das Imperium schlägt zurück. That's the name of the Star Wars film, The Empire Strikes Back. In German, we have zurückschlagen as our verb. And the last one is zusammenbauen. Zusammenbauen is to assemble. And so if you're assembling things from IKEA, that's the sentence you would use as my example here. Or if you are assembling your Avengers or something, that's not zusammenbauen, so be careful with that. But to assemble, in this case, putting things together. Ich baue das Regal von IKEA selbst zusammen. Ich baue das Regal von IKEA selbst zusammen. I am assembling the shelf from IKEA on my own. Next up we have dual prefixes. These are really, really confusing and probably aren't going to be necessary for you to learn for a little while. But this is, I didn't actually give you any example sentences with these because they're kind of elevated. I'm going to say that they're verbs that you're not going to use as often, and you're going to kind of have to memorize whether they're separable or inseparable for each of those. But we have separable prefixes or inseparable prefixes, but these are both, or either or. If you hear one of these verbs out loud, you should be able to notice which ones are which, because the separable prefixes are stressed. So when you say the verb as its entirety, so like überfahren, über is the part that is emphasized in that, as opposed to an inseparable version, which would be like durchfahren. Durchfahren is an inseparable version which has fahren as the part that is stressed. So anyway, these are the 6 that you need to be aware of, and that is durch, über, unter, weder, and wieder. So those wonderful prefixes there, meaning through, above, around, down or below, against, and again. All of those can be separable or they could be non-separable. And the reason I'm bringing these up is because when you're conjugating your verbs in German in the present tense, it might be helpful to know whether it is ich durchfahre or ich fahre durch. And so those sentences you need to kind of memorize as they come up. Next up we have inseparable prefixes, and this is this list here. And the reason I bring these up is because you might see a verb like kommen, to come, and then you have a verb like bekommen, and you're like, I don't know what to do with this verb, but it looks like a verb kommen. And the cool thing is that these prefixes don't change the way that the verb acts. So if you have like a verb nehmen, as I showed you in the previous versions, the conjugation of nehmen didn't change in those sentences. The way that you use it doesn't change. And this is true of every single tense that you're going to use any of these verbs in. So when you get to the simple past tense of the verb bekommen, bekommen follows the same patterns as the verb kommen. So knowing these inseparable prefixes can be incredibly helpful once you get to that point. Anyway, the first one on our list is be, or be. This forces the verb to take an object, meaning that it kind of pushes whatever the verb was before upon some object. And I'll show you an example of that here in just a second. Emp, E-M-P, those are to sense or to receive. So again, I'll show you an example of what that means, but receive is kind of the general sense that I usually use. Ent means away, or in English we actually have kind of an equivalent with d or dis. So like decapitate, for instance, is a German verb that starts with ent, and in English it starts with d. If you put er or er in front of a verb, it changes things more than likely to be fatal or dead, or occasionally it can mean like the English re, as in to start something again or again. That's just re. And so in German that can be er, but a lot of times it's going to mean that something is fatal or it kills whatever it is that the verb is. GE is a hodgepodge of a bunch of different things that it can do to a verb. It's really confusing to try and translate exactly what GE does to a verb, but if you see it in there, it is a non-separable prefix, even if it resembles another verb. Hinter is behind, and this is also actually what hinter means when it's not being used as a prefix, so that one's pretty straightforward. One that I like is miss, because miss is the same as miss in English, so that one's kind of handy. Fair means something bad, or it's going awry, or it's often used like the English miss or for as a prefix. So fair meaning something bad. Voll is pretty easy because it looks like the English word full and is pronounced like that and generally means exactly that, full or complete, voll. Zer means to collapse or to shatter or to shred, usually means that something is being torn apart in the way that the verb is being used. Examples of these, we have bekommen. Bekommen is to receive. Kommen is to come, and if something comes to you, then that means that you receive that thing, and so here we have bekommen, to receive. So, meine Kinder bekommen Schokolade zu Weihnachten. My children receive chocolate for Christmas. Meine Kinder bekommen Schokolade zu Weihnachten. Empfehlen. Empfehlen means to recommend. Fehlen on its own means to be lacking or missing or to fail. So empfangen, empfehlen that is, sorry, different verb. Empfehlen means to recommend, which is kind of weird, but basically it means that it changes from something being lacking to I'm going to show you what it is that you're lacking by recommending something to you. So, for instance, der Kellner empfiehlt den Rinderbraten. Der Kellner empfiehlt den Rinderbraten. So the waiter recommends the roast beef. Empfehlen. Also, word to the wise, empfehlen is also a stem changing verb, so here we have that IE in the stem rather than just the E. Entfernen. Entfernen means to remove. Fern means far, and ent means to take something off, so entfernen means to remove. It's pretty straightforward that way. And our example here we have Ich entferne die Blätter vom Dach. Ich entferne die Blätter vom Dach. I remove the leaves from the roof. Next up we have erreichen. So we have to achieve or to accomplish. Reichen means to reach, and erreichen is to achieve or accomplish. So just a slight difference between these two. You can reach your goals or you can achieve your goals, and in German this is a very similar verb with reichen and erreichen. So for instance, mit harter Arbeit erreichen wir unsere Ziele. With hard work we achieve our goals. Mit harter Arbeit erreichen wir unsere Ziele. Next up is gefallen. Gefallen is to please or to be liking, to like something, and it's used kind of backwards from what we think it is. So like in English we say, I like this thing. In German we literally are saying, this thing is pleasing to me, which is really confusing. If you're familiar with Spanish, it basically does the same thing that the verb gustar does, in that it takes an object that normally in English we would think as the subject of the sentence. So, gefallen, to like. It's also a stem changing verb, so it takes an a umlaut instead of just an a in the stem of this verb. So, das T-Shirt gefällt mir. I like the T-shirt. Das T-Shirt gefällt mir. Next up we have hinterlassen. Hinter means behind and lassen means to leave, so hinterlassen obviously means to leave behind. This one is also a stem-changing verb, and so we have here an A umlaut instead of just an A. Der Verbrecher hinterlässt viele Spuren. Der Verbrecher hinterlässt viele Spuren. The criminal leaves behind many clues. Next up we have missbrauchen. Brauchen means to need, and miss means like the English word miss does. So it is to abuse in this case, missbrauchen. And so we have here, missbraucht den Löffel als Messer. He misuses the spoon as a knife. Missbraucht den Löffel als Messer. Then we have the verb verstehen. Verstehen means to understand. Stehen means to stand. So verstehen meaning to understand isn't too much of a stretch. Ich verstehe sie nicht. Ich verstehe sie nicht. Ich verstehe sie nicht. Voll is complete or full or final in this case. So that's vollenden, to complete or finalize. Enden means to end, and in this case we're going to end something fully and therefore complete or finalize. So we have here der Künstler vollendet sein Meisterwerk. Der Künstler vollendet sein Meisterwerk. The artist is completing his masterpiece. And the last one on our list, zer, Z-E-R. As I mentioned before, it means to tear stuff usually, or to make things worse, torn apart than they were before. So reißen means to tear. In this case, we have zerreißen, which is to tear apart. So ihr Ehemann zerreißt den Brief. Her husband is tearing up the letter. Ihr Ehemann zerreißt den Brief. All right, now we're going to get into another complicated thing, and looks like I'm going to be running over our hour goal, but that's fine. I'm okay with that if you guys are okay with that. So we are running up on the hour-long point in this video, but we're going to continue on and keep talking about modal auxiliaries, or sometimes called auxiliary verbs, or sometimes even called modal auxiliary verbs. So that's kind of confusing. Basically what this does is it's a bunch of verbs that generally are used with other verbs. That's the reason they're called auxiliary verbs, is because they're used in addition to other verbs. And they're called modal verbs because they change the mood of the sentence. And I know that the mood sounds like it's like, oh, it's going to be all romantic now because we're using this verb. And no, that's not what's happening. We're changing the way that the other verb acts in the sentence by using this auxiliary. And so we're going to start off with these two, even though it looks like three verbs. And we're going to start with mögen. Mögen means to like and is weird, as all of the modal auxiliaries are, which is why we're talking about them in such great detail in this presentation here. So conjugation for the ich, du, and sie forms changes from mögen to mag as our stem, and none of the endings will happen for ich or sie in any of these modal auxiliaries. They all will not have an ending. So not a single one of them, ich or sie, will have any ending whatsoever. That's ich mag, du magst, sie es mag, wir mögen, ihr mögt, sie mögen. So again, it's a little weird. It means to like. This one is generally speaking not used with another verb. I'll show you an example of when it could be, in which case it no longer means to like. But this one is mostly used as just a verb, not an auxiliary verb, but just a normal everyday verb. It just happens to be weird and conjugated like all of the other modal auxiliaries. So the singular forms, ich, du, and sie, those are the weird ones, and the rest of them are normal. I do mention the what a lot of people seem to think as an actual verb of möchten. Möchten is not actually a verb. Möchten is a form of the verb mögen. Mögen means to like, and möchten is the subjunctive mood version of mögen, meaning would like. Now, subjunctive mood is fancy grammar talk for basically it's things that are contrary to reality, things that are not actually happening. So this would be, I would like. So the difference between to like and would like in English, for instance, you would have, I like that car. That means that you actually do like that car. Or the sentence of, I would like that car if it were yellow. If that sentence is there, that's not actually, I don't actually like that car there. It's just, I would if it weren't that color. So anyway, would like, I mention this because it is very commonly used like this, and it doesn't require you to have a whole lot of knowledge of the subjunctive or the Konjunktiv 2 in order to use this. So basically we start with our stem of möch, and then we add what are actually past tense endings of te, test, te, ten, tet, and ten. So conjugation of mögen, when you mean it to use as would like, would be ich möchte, du möchtest, sie, es möchte, wir möchten, ihr möchtet, sie möchten. And the other one that I want to put kind of in the same lump as these two would be wollen, for pretty obvious reasons, and that is wollen means to want. And if would like is the verb möchten, or whatever you want to call the subjunctive form of mögen, if wollen means to want, what's the difference between would like and want? As in, I want that car versus I would like that car. What's the difference? Basically nothing. The only real difference is that would like is considered to be more polite. So if you say, ich will den Rinderbraten, I want the roast beef. If you say, ich möchte den Rinderbraten, it's much more polite. So conjugation of this one is also weird. In the ich, du, and RCS forms, it changes from wollen to will. So it's ich will, du willst, sie, es will, wir wollen, ihr wollt, sie wollen. And now some examples of how you can use these. The first one is showing you that mag or mögen can be used in the same way that you use the adverb gern. Gern means that you change from the verb that you originally had, changing it into to liking that verb. So in this case we have gern haben, which means that I like that thing. We just get rid of the have in English for that. So ich habe gern Pizza, I like pizza, is exactly the same meaning as ich mag Pizza. No difference whatsoever, it's the exact same thing. Ich habe gern Pizza, ich mag Pizza. It's I like pizza versus I like pizza. Now, I mentioned before that mag or mögen is generally not used with another verb, and that is mostly true. If you do happen to use it with another verb, however, it may be that you translate this verb as may instead of just to like. So when it's used all by itself, it always means to like, but when you use it with another verb, it gets kind of tricky and it could mean may. So this is actually, by the way, the original meaning of the verb mögen, and then it kind of evolved into what it is now for liking things, but it's always been may in traditional German. So example of this would be like in the clause wie es der Fall mag sein, as the case may be. We have sein as our infinitive, and we have here mag as our conjugated form of mögen. At any rate, it means may in this sentence and not to like. And the last one here is a sentence comparing the difference between wollen and möchten. And so I have the kind of approximation equal sign there, and that's because they're not quite the same, but they're basically the same. The only difference is the second one is more polite. So, ich will Pizza essen, ich will Pizza essen, I want to eat pizza, versus ich möchte Pizza essen, ich möchte Pizza essen, I would like to eat pizza. Basically the same thing. Also, this gives us a great opportunity to talk about what happens to the other verb if you are using a modal auxiliary with an extra verb. Remember that infinitive word that I brought up before? That infinitive, meaning the form of the verb that you find in the dictionary, the form that has an en at the end of it, all of those things we have here, those go at the end of the sentence. Much like the separable prefixes that we had before, those now go at the end of the sentence as the infinitive form. So, ich will Pizza essen. Essen is at the end of the sentence because it is the extra verb that goes with the auxiliary. If you had it without the modal auxiliary, it would be ich esse Pizza, I am eating pizza. Now that we have essen in the sentence, it changes so that we now have ich will Pizza essen, and we shove that infinitive to the end of the sentence. Three more of these modal auxiliaries. We have dürfen, können, and müssen. Dürfen means may. It's used to ask for permission for things, so may, to be allowed to, something along those lines. And the other one here is können, can, or to be able to be physically able to do something. And then we have müssen, which means must or to have to. Sometimes in English we use the verb need in this way, and that is müssen. Conjugation of these, we'll just go through the list. We have ich darf, du darfst, sie, es darf, wir dürfen, ihr dürft, sie dürfen. Again, that happens in the ich, du, and sie, es form. We drop the u umlaut in favor of an a, and we again do not have an ending for the ich or sie, es forms. So ich darf, du darfst, sie, es darf. Können does something similar. We lose the o umlaut this time for an a, and again, no ending for ich or sie, es. Ich kann, du kannst, sie, es kann, wir können, ihr könnt, sie können. And then müssen does something a little bit different, and that is instead of having the u umlaut change to an a, like it did in dürfen, we now have just a u instead. So instead of müssen, we now have muss. So conjugation goes ich muss, du musst, sie, es muss, wir müssen, ihr müsst, sie müssen. So there's your next three. And for good measure, we have some example sentences with these, because again, I want to show you that the infinitive of the verb goes to the end of the sentence if you're going to use one of these modal auxiliaries. So verb here is dürfen. On the first one, we have darf ich ins Kino gehen? Darf ich ins Kino gehen? Darf ich ins Kino gehen? May I go to the movie theater? Next one, we have a form of können. Können is conjugated as kann in this sentence for the sie, es form, for der Mann, he. So, der Mann kann 200 Kilo heben. Der Mann kann 200 Kilo heben. The man can lift 200 kilograms. And the last one here gives us an example of a separable prefix. We have that prefix auf, which I mentioned before is a separable prefix. And now we have it back together as the infinitive form, meaning that these are now one word. And so it's that important that we remember those separable prefixes, as if you're using them as the infinitive at the end of the sentence, or in other cases when that might happen in German, make sure that you have these as one word, as that's what happens to the separable prefixes. They go back together in the infinitive. So the verb here is müssen for our modal auxiliary and aufbauen for our regular verb. So conjugation, and the sentence is muss ein Zelt aufbauen. Muss ein Zelt aufbauen. He has to put up a tent. Next up, we have the verb sollen, and you'll notice that I have two versions of sollen, and that's because I again use the subjunctive or the Konjunktiv 2, the hypothetical, because sollen, when it's used like normal conjugation in the present tense, which is the first column there, that is usually used as shall, as in you're going to do this thing. It's not a suggestion. The other form is sollte or solltest or any of those other forms. Those forms are should, as in you should do this. This is my recommendation. Not necessarily you're going to do this thing. You have to do this thing. So conjugation of sollen is ich soll, du sollst, sie, es soll, wir sollen, ihr sollt, sie sollen. Now that may be a bit confusing because all of the other ones had some sort of stem change, but this one just has an O just like it did in the stem, and instead just doesn't have an ending for the ich or sie, es form. So that's kind of confusing. But ich soll, du sollst, sie, es soll, wir sollen, ihr sollt, sie sollen, sie sollen. And then the other version here is the one again for using recommendation. You're going to use those same te endings that you had for möchten, and the conjugation would look like this. Ich sollte, du solltest, sie, es sollte, wir sollten, ihr solltet, sie sollten. Now I have some example sentences here using both versions so that you can see them side by side so that you know what the actual difference in meaning is between sollen and sollten. First one here is du sollst das Geschirr spülen, which is you're supposed to do the dishes or wash the dishes. But this one is not a suggestion. So this is like your mom saying, you should wash the dishes. But she's really saying you're going to wash the dishes. Du sollst das Geschirr spülen. You should wash the dishes, or you're supposed to. The other one, on the other hand, du solltest das Geschirr spülen. Du solltest das Geschirr spülen. That one is a suggestion. It's recommended. It's saying you should, not you shall, you are going to. But this one is the suggestion. Du solltest das Geschirr spülen. Next one is he is supposed to call you. This is not a suggestion. He's going to. He shall call you if you want to use old archaic English. Soll dich anrufen. Soll dich anrufen. He is supposed to call you. He should or shall call you. The other one is the suggested form. He should. He's supposed to. We're recommending that he does. Sollte dich anrufen. Sollte dich anrufen. He should call you. And again, the verb anrufen in both of those last examples, that's a separable prefix verb, but we put the prefix back together with the infinitive of the verb because that's what they do with those separable prefixes. So just a reminder of what that does. Now, this is showing you the verb at the end of the sentence and showing you a difference between the original version of the sentence to the new version of the sentence. So we have Ich kaufe einen Döner. I am buying a Döner, that is in Döner Kebab. Ich kaufe einen Döner. I am buying a Döner. Nothing fancy there, we just have an E at the end of the verb to go with the Ich form. Then the other version here, we used a form of wollen, and we say Ich will einen Döner kaufen. We moved kaufen back to the infinitive form, which is the form with the en at the end of it, and we put that at the end of the sentence. We then conjugated wollen and put it where the other verb used to be. Ich will einen Döner kaufen. I want to buy a Döner. Next up we have fahren, which is an irregular verb or a stem-changing verb, so we use here an a umlaut. Fährt mit dem Fahrrad zur Schule. He is riding his bicycle to school. Fährt mit dem Fahrrad zur Schule. And then the other version here, we used a form of müssen meaning must or to have to. And so we're using this, and then we push fahren back into the infinitive form and put that at the end of the sentence. He has to ride his bicycle to school. Muss mit dem Fahrrad zur Schule fahren. Muss mit dem Fahrrad zur Schule fahren. He has to ride his bicycle to school. Now, you don't always actually have to use the infinitive at the end of the sentence. A lot of times with things like eating and drinking, for instance, you can imply that extra verb. So we have here, isst gerne Spargel. He likes eating asparagus. If we want, we could then change the sentence to use a form of mögen and get rid of the verb essen entirely and just say, mag Spargel. He likes asparagus. We assume you don't like hitting people with asparagus or like throwing it at traffic or something. We think that you like to eat that asparagus, and therefore this is implied with the verb essen in there. It doesn't actually have it written into the sentence. Mag Spargel, isst gerne Spargel. They both mean basically the same thing. Next up we have Ich bestelle den Rinderbraten. Ich bestelle den Rinderbraten. And that one there, Rinderbraten is roast beef, and we're ordering that roast beef, and so we have here an E at the end of the sentence, at the end of the verb for the Ich form. If you want to use the same sentence, but you're ordering food in a restaurant, you could say to your waiter, Ich möchte den Rinderbraten. I would like the roast beef. We assume I would like to order the roast beef. The to order in that sentence is implied in the möchte. So, Ich möchte den Rinderbraten. We assume bestellen. Okay? If you go to my website, germanwithantrim.com, you can then add a donation point on there, and if you donate $5 or more, I will go ahead and send you the same extra materials that go with this. So that would include the copy of the presentation, a copy of kind of a rough draft of what my script is for this, and then also an MP3 version of this presentation, kind of like a podcast that way. And then you'll also get a worksheet so that you can practice all of these things that you were taught in this master class.